Hi, I'm Leslie Meredith with Breakbulk Events and Media. I'm here in Houston at Breakbulk Americas with our keynote speaker of Day 2, Roger Baker of Stratfor, who's given a tremendously comprehensive view of the entire global situation and then focusing on some of the trade agreements, in particular NAFTA, which is obviously important to our constituency here. So tell us what you're seeing with that. Some people certainly have taken an alarmist view that it's going to be completely eliminated, but it sounds like that's not the case.
No, I think when we're looking at NAFTA, we're not necessarily seeing this as something that's just going to be completely removed or thrown away. In the end, trade between the United States and Mexico, trade between the United States and Canada, is a very important component for the U.S. just as much as it is for the Canadians, for the Mexicans. And it can't simply be eliminated or thrown away. So what we're really looking at are what are the critical issues in each of these countries' interests that have changed since NAFTA was signed, because NAFTA was signed even before the WTO went into effect. So it's a very old, early example of a trade agreement that would be shaping future trade agreements to follow it. When we're looking at the United States right now, the big focus is obviously things like local content, both local content in the sense of NAFTA and local content in the United States. A lot of countries have taken advantage of NAFTA by investing, say, in Mexico, building things in Mexico and having them count as being in NAFTA to come into the United States. So they've exploited those spaces. And I think that's what the use is trying to push back against. It's hoping that it can encourage investment in. In the long run, we do see some new resolutions coming. There's certainly going to be changes to it. Pieces will probably fall off. The Canadians can trade away the Section 19 if they really want to, and get something in return. That's where you get into your dispute resolution mechanisms that they really wanted in the beginning, that are barely used today. So it was important to them when NAFTA was first signed. It's perceived to be important now, but it may be a way for them to, if they give in on that to the U.S., they can get something back. I think the biggest challenge, though, will be if there is ultimately an agreement for a sunset clause, because a sunset clause would mean that every X number of years you have to relook at NAFTA if there are still problems with trade with surpluses and things of that sort, right? That you then sort of end the trade. And if you put sunset clauses into these types of trade agreements, it really does undermine the sense of continuity and the sense of investment reliability.
Oh, that's interesting. And that could have a significant impact on project development. Okay. So if we sort of zoom out a bit and look at global trade agreements, what kinds of changes do you see happening with those, or the trends that will affect future trade agreements?
We're seeing a lot of sort of reversals of these giant multinational trade agreements. The complexity of doing one of those agreements is just amazing, right? And you look at the amount of work, for example, that went into the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, all the way up to the end. Everybody's got a 1,000 little things. They finally come to a partial agreement, and by then the politics in the U.S. has changed, the president has changed, it's simply pulled out. They're just so complex because they involve so many countries and so many different layers within trade. Everything from IP protections to labor laws to, and then finally to trade, right? I think the trend is going to be moving back away from that. It's going to be more regional and sub-regional. It's going to be smaller trade agreements, maybe fewer countries, and with fewer items in each trade agreement. So it may be that there's a trade agreement on the automotive sector between two countries rather than a trade agreement on all aspects of manufacturing and agriculture. Because those are easier to do, they're easier to make. They don't give you that same sort of broad framework, but they do allow countries to move at a much more rapid pace and adjust to the changes in the global dynamics.
Right, and it sounds like that kind of an agreement maybe has less compromise inherent in it because you're talking about one industry. So maybe it's easier to meet rather than when you're trying to cover everything in one agreement.
Right, there's a lot fewer of the complexities that say, okay, well, the TPP was held up over New Zealand butter, right? but it was really about a Japan-U.S. trade agreement for automotive and things. So when you can ease some of those smaller parochial interests out, because every country in a big multinational one knows that they have the ability at the last minute to undermine the whole thing by holding out their one little pet project. Again, if you bring it smaller in scope, smaller in scale, it may be no less difficult in the negotiations because it's very serious, but it also may remove some of the politics behind it. And some of the resistance from countries, because they can then see very clearly, okay, here's my wins, here's my losses, I consider that good on my side, the other side says, here's my wins, my losses, there's enough that we can make.
All right, well that's great. Thank you so much for all of that insight. We appreciate it.